One of the world's most powerful regulators was in Australia today, just for one day, to give the International Distinguished Lecture for the Australian Centre for Financial Studies. Martin Wheatley is CEO of the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission and will very shortly be moving to run the new British regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, with all the new rules of the post-financial crisis era. I spoke to him earlier. Now, you earned quite a reputation in Hong Kong as a proactive enforcer, I think famously on insider trading, but also post the Lehman's crisis, you were a defender of the retail investor. What exactly did you achieve?
Well, like most markets in the world, we found a lot of retail investors were holding products that were just completely unsuitable. They shouldn't have been sold the products in the first place. We negotiated a fairly major deal with 16 of the banks in Hong Kong who agreed to repurchase the Securities, and it's the first time anything on that scale has been done in Hong Kong, or I think most other markets in the world.
Having been quite a tough regulator, how is your relationship with business in Hong Kong as you leave it?
I think it's critically important for a regulator to be close to the industry it regulates, not so close that you become captured by it, but close enough to understand trends and development. The worst situation is if you become out of touch and introduce rules which, frankly, have the opposite effect that you intended.
Just last week, you've put in new regulations on credit agencies in Hong Kong in line with international regulations. What contribution do you think credit agencies had to the financial crisis?
Well, it's partly the rating agencies themselves who I think allowed their methodology to be too much driven by the bottom line, and partly the way people use ratings. And unfortunately, rating is a shorthand for a credit worthiness, but people blindly follow AAA ratings when they should have been asking more questions about what went on below the AAA rating.
Is it a fundamental flaw that they are actually paid by, in the end, entities that they rate?
Well, it's a problem. I think it is a problem, but actually it's very hard to come up with a different model, and we spend a lot of time looking at other models. So effectively what we've ended up doing is overlaying the way that the rating agencies work with obviously a licensing code, a regulatory structure as in Hong Kong, and conflicts codes within the rating agencies themselves.
Well, which brings me to the UK and your new job. Now, how can investors who lost their shirts during the financial crisis be comforted that the new Financial Conduct Authority that you'll be running will be any different in practice from the FSA, both in attitude and in the teeth that it'll have?
Well, everybody learns from a crisis, what you go through in a crisis. The market here very much learned from the collapse of HIH, and you found that in this crisis the prudential regulation was much stronger and stood Australia in good stead. The same is true in the UK. There's new legislation being passed, new rules, new laws being established, and a new agency being created, which will have a slightly different remit. But you do learn, and I think the thing that we've learned is that the products got much too complicated, much too sophisticated, and we need a simpler form of product.
What about the politics and what goes on in practice? Because, I mean, you will no doubt be under pressure from certain parts of the City of London and indeed certain politicians to maintain a light touch regulation because of the concerns of keeping Britain as a financial hub.
Well, I don't think anybody's realistically talking about light touch regulation at the moment. That was a phraseology that maybe 3 or 4 years ago people felt, well, that's what we need. Nobody does today. Inevitably the role is political. It's bound to be political. It's political partly because the UK government have injected $100 billion into the UK banks. So there are inevitably a lot of different interests. The job of the regulator is to try to stay immune from the sort of party political interest and deliver the law properly. It's very simple at the end of the day.
You mentioned how complicated deals and transactions had become. Will the FCA be responsible for private equity and hedge funds? And if so, will you be able to peer into such transactions?
The FSA, well, the FSA today has some responsibilities and so does peer into hedge funds and into private equity. What we've been doing with other regulators, including with ASIC, is try to develop the sort of information that we want to collect. And we've just been through a major exercise collecting more information from hedge funds. I see that process continuing.
In the past, you've been Deputy Chief Executive of the London Stock Exchange. What do you make of our Australian government's decision to stop the ASX-SGX merger?
Well, I think the reality is that some of these mergers deliver some benefits. Some of them don't necessarily deliver benefits. I don't know that there's a particular loss for the Australian market having not pursued the merger. At the end of the day, it's about organisations delivering benefits to their customers. A merged entity could deliver some cost savings, but equally a standalone ASX could achieve that.
It's very interesting that you're not an enthusiast there. Are you a big believer in merging exchanges generally? And are there increased risks from a regulatory point of view that this could lead in some cases to sort of lowest common denominator regulation between the two bourses?
Well, I think there are risks, and there are always risks, and primarily the risk is that with any national system, the national regulator has governance, authority, control over the national exchange. In any merge situation, you've got a parent company or a set of shareholders who aren't subject to that direct oversight and control. So there are risks, but you can work around those risks, and we've seen some successful mergers where the governments and the regulators have achieved the right level of oversight that they can feel comfortable that they don't have oversight at the top company level.
Martin Wheatley, I guess I should say good luck out there. Thank you very much for joining the programme.
Thank you very much.